Thomas wiped the grease from his hands onto an old cloth that had seen better days. His repair shop on Kepler Station was small, cramped, and barely making enough money to keep the lights on. The walls were lined with broken parts from 100 different ships, organized in a chaotic system that only Thomas understood. He was 32 years old, had been working as a mechanic for the last 10 years, and had nothing to show for it except calloused hands and an empty bank account. The distress beacon screamed across the communication frequency just as Thomas was about to close up for the day. He sat down at his desk and listened to the automated message. A ship was damaged and needed immediate docking. The owner was willing to pay for emergency repairs. Thomas did not hesitate. He needed the money desperately. Within 20 minutes, the damaged vessel limped into Bay 7 of the station. Thomas could see immediately that this was not a human ship. The design was completely different from anything he had ever worked on. The hull was a shimmering metallic color that seemed to change in the light. There were panels and sections that did not fit any pattern he recognized. Smoke was pouring from one section of the ship, and the docking mechanism was sparking dangerously. The airlock hissed open and a woman emerged. Thomas's breath caught in his throat. She was unlike anyone he had ever seen before. Her skin had a luminous silver quality that seemed to glow from within. Her eyes shifted between violet and blue as she moved, as if they contained liquid light. She was tall, graceful, and moved with a kind of practiced elegance despite the obvious pain in her stride. Her clothes were made of a fabric that seemed to flow and shift with her movements. "I need repairs," the woman said simply. Her voice was smooth and musical, with an accent Thomas could not place. "My ship has sustained critical damage. The main power core is failing. Navigation systems are offline. Life support is at 40% capacity. I need these systems restored as quickly as possible. I can pay well for this service." Thomas nodded slowly, trying to hide his nervousness. He had never worked on an alien vessel before. He did not even know where to start. But he grabbed his handheld diagnostic tool and approached the ship. The woman, who introduced herself only as Elaine, watched him carefully as he began his work. Thomas scanned the ship's exterior first. The readings on his tool made his eyes widen. The technology was completely foreign to him. The systems were layered in ways that should not work, yet they clearly did. They were elegant. Impossibly elegant. Every connection seemed to serve multiple purposes. Every circuit appeared to be integrated with others in ways he had never imagined. "The damage is extensive," Thomas said quietly, more to himself than to Elaine. He moved toward the main hatch and stepped inside the ship. The interior was just as strange as the exterior. The walls seemed to be made of a smooth material that was not quite metal and not quite something else. The lighting came from panels that glowed with a soft blue radiance. The air inside smelled clean and slightly sweet. There were no visible wires or cables, yet Thomas could see small lights pulsing beneath the surface of the walls, indicating energy flow. Thomas spent the next few minutes examining the damage. A large section of the rear compartment had been compromised. Something had struck the ship hard. The power core was still running, but it was failing. Emergency backup systems were barely keeping the ship from complete shutdown. "I need to work through the night," Thomas told Elaine. "This is going to take time. I have never worked on a ship like this before, but I can try." Elaine nodded and settled herself on a small bench near the work area. She watched Thomas with intense interest as he began his work. Thomas started by disconnecting the damaged power core carefully. Then he began tracing the connections, trying to understand how the system worked. Most alien technology used similar principles to human technology, but the details were different. He studied the patterns, made notes, and started making educated guesses about what each component did. Hours passed. Thomas did not stop to eat or rest. He worked through the night, completely absorbed in the puzzle before him. Something about this challenge called to him in a way that nothing else ever had. It was not just the complexity of the technology. It was the elegance of it. Whoever had designed this ship had done so with an understanding of physics and engineering that went far beyond what Thomas had been taught. Elaine remained in the ship with him throughout the night. She watched him work intently. She asked questions about his methods, about why he chose certain approaches over others. She seemed genuinely curious about how he thought, not just what he was doing. "Most engineers would try to replace the damaged components," she observed as Thomas carefully repaired a section of the core matrix. "There is no point in replacing what can be fixed," Thomas replied, focused on his work. "Besides, I do not have replacement parts for alien technology. I have to work with what is here and figure out how to make it function again." As the night progressed, Thomas began to understand the logic behind the ship's design. It was built on principles that were different from human engineering, but once he grasped the basic concepts, everything else started to make sense. By dawn, he had restored partial power to the main systems. The navigation core came online next. Finally, the life support system stabilized completely. Thomas stepped back and wiped his forehead with his arm, leaving a smear of grease behind. His eyes were heavy with exhaustion, but the ship was functional again. "It is done," he said quietly. Elaine stood and approached him. She examined the work Thomas had completed, studying every detail. A subtle smile crossed her face. "You have remarkable talent," she said. "Very few beings would have been able to do what you just did." She placed her hand briefly on Thomas's shoulder. The gesture felt ceremonial, as if she was marking him somehow. Then she removed a small device from her pocket and transferred 50,000 credits to Thomas's account. It was more money than Thomas made in a year. "Thank you," Elaine said. She walked toward the airlock and paused. "You will hear from me again, Thomas. I am certain of it." Then she was gone, disappearing into the vastness of space. Thomas stood alone in his shop, holding the payment chip, wondering if he had dreamed the entire encounter. 3 months had passed since Thomas had last seen Elaine. He had tried to go back to his normal life, working on broken ships and barely making enough money to survive. But things had changed. With the 50,000 credits she had given him, Thomas had upgraded his repair shop. He bought new tools, better equipment, and hired an assistant named Henry to help with the workload. Business had improved slightly, but Thomas could not stop thinking about that night. He kept wondering who Elaine really was and where she had come from. Then one morning everything changed. Thomas was working under a damaged freighter when his communication system buzzed. He crawled out from under the ship and wiped his hands on his work pants. The message was urgent and official. A pristine diplomatic cruiser had just arrived at Kepler Station. The representatives aboard were requesting his immediate presence. The message did not say why. Thomas felt a cold sensation run down his spine. He wondered if something was wrong. Maybe Elaine's ship had broken down again and she needed his help. Or maybe he had done something illegal without knowing it. Thomas had always tried to follow the rules, but dealing with alien technology sometimes put him in uncertain situations. He showered quickly, changed into clean clothes, and made his way to the docking platform where the diplomatic cruiser waited. The ship was unlike anything Thomas had ever seen. It was sleek and elegant, with smooth lines and surfaces that seemed to shimmer with an inner light. Armed guards in formal uniforms stood at attention near the airlock. A representative emerged from the ship. She was tall and wore flowing robes of deep blue that seemed to shift color in the light. Her face was stern and official. "Thomas Wright," she said, checking a datapad in her hands. "I am Ambassador Kia. I have been sent to escort you to the Meridian Station. Please come with me." "Am I in trouble?" Thomas asked nervously. "Did I do something wrong?" "You are being honored," the ambassador replied cryptically. "Empress Eleanor has requested your presence personally. That is all I am permitted to say." Thomas's heart began to race. Empress Eleanor? He had never heard that name before. But something inside him knew it was connected to Elaine somehow. The journey aboard the diplomatic cruiser was unlike anything Thomas had experienced. The ship moved through space in ways that defied normal physics. One moment they were near Kepler Station, and the next moment they were traveling through hyperspace, the stars stretching into ribbons of light outside the viewport. Thomas watched in amazement as the ship passed through a jump gate, and suddenly the view changed completely. Before them lay a space station so massive that Thomas could barely comprehend its size. It was not just a station. It was a city in space. Multiple structures spiraled outward from a central hub, connected by bridges and transit tubes that glowed with soft light. The surface was covered in gleaming metal that reflected the light of nearby stars. There were gardens visible through transparent sections, green plants growing in carefully maintained habitats. Thousands of ships of various sizes moved around the station in organized patterns. "Welcome to Meridian Station," Ambassador Kia said quietly. "Capital of the Althean Collective. Home to the Empress and seat of government for the Empire." An empire. Thomas had never even considered that Elaine might be part of an empire. She had seemed like a traveler, someone who needed help with a broken ship. But now Thomas was beginning to understand that everything had been far more complicated than he had realized. The diplomatic cruiser docked at a private platform. Thomas was escorted through corridors lined with guards and officials. Everyone wore formal clothing and moved with purpose. The architecture around him was beautiful and alien. The walls seemed to be made of a material that was neither metal nor stone but something in between. Soft lighting emanated from panels embedded in the surfaces. Finally they arrived at a large chamber. The doors slid open and Thomas stepped inside. His breath caught in his throat. Elaine stood waiting for him. But she was completely transformed. She wore robes of deep indigo threaded with what appeared to be living light. The fabric seemed to move and flow of its own accord. Her bearing had changed entirely. This was not the vulnerable woman with a broken ship who had watched him work through the night. This was authority incarnate. This was power given human form. "Thomas," she said, and her voice now carried the weight of command. It echoed slightly in the large chamber. "Welcome to Meridian Station. I am Empress Eleanor of the Althean Collective. The woman you helped 3 months ago was only a fraction of who I am." Thomas felt his knees weaken. He did not know whether to bow or speak or simply stand frozen in place. "I travel incognito sometimes," Eleanor continued, moving closer to him. "It is something my people have done for generations. When leaders wish to understand the true character of those they might trust, they present themselves as ordinary beings in difficult situations. You passed that test completely, Thomas. When you saw my broken ship, you did not ask who I was or what I could do for you. You simply helped. You worked through the night because the work interested you. You used your intelligence and creativity to solve a problem that seemed impossible. That is rare. That is valuable. That is exactly what I need." Eleanor gestured toward the viewport. Beyond it, Thomas could see the vast expanse of the Empire. Planets hung in space like jewels. Ships moved between them in organized patterns. Stations similar to Meridian Station orbited distant suns. "I command an empire spanning 43 star systems," Eleanor said. "Billions of beings live under my rule. Trillions of credits flow through our economy every day. I have access to technology that your people have not even dreamed of yet. And yet, despite all of this power and resources, I face a crisis. My civilization has grown complacent. We have become stagnant." She turned to face Thomas directly. "My engineers follow protocols written centuries ago. They innovate only within boundaries that were set by leaders long dead. They fear change. They fear making mistakes. But you, Thomas, you solved an alien ship's problems with intuition and creativity and genuine brilliance. You did not follow a manual. You thought for yourself. That is what I need. I need someone who can help my people remember how to think differently. I need someone from a species that survived through adaptation, not privilege." Eleanor extended her hand toward Thomas. "Will you help me, Thomas Wright? Will you come and work for my empire? Will you help us find innovation again?" Thomas looked at her hand. 3 months ago, a woman had paid him 50,000 credits. Now that same woman, revealed as an empress, was asking him to change his entire life. Everything inside Thomas told him this was crazy. But something else, something deeper, told him that this was exactly what he was meant to do. He took her hand. "Yes," he said simply. "I will help you." Eleanor smiled, and it was like watching the sun rise across an alien horizon. "Then let me show you what we have built," she said. "And together we will help it grow." Eleanor led Thomas through the corridors of Meridian Station for hours. They passed through laboratories filled with technology that made his head spin. Scientists and engineers worked at stations that seemed to float in midair. Holographic displays showed complex data in 3 dimensions. The air hummed with the sound of machinery and quiet conversation. "This is the primary research division," Eleanor explained as they walked. "This is where the best minds in my empire work. They have access to resources that most civilizations could never dream of. And yet, productivity has declined steadily over the past 50 years. Thomas looked at the scientists working around him. They seemed focused, but something felt off. They moved in careful, measured ways. They consulted thick reference manuals before making any adjustments to their equipment. No one seemed to take risks or try anything new. "Why has productivity declined?" Thomas asked. "Fear," Eleanor said simply. "When you have had success for thousands of years, when your civilization has reached a level of stability and comfort, change becomes frightening. My Council of Ministers controls all major decisions. They have instituted protocols and procedures for everything. No engineer can make a significant modification without approval from the Council. No scientist can pursue research that falls outside approved parameters. We have created a system designed to prevent mistakes. But we have also created a system that prevents progress." Eleanor stopped at a large window that looked out over the station and the empire beyond. Stars filled the darkness of space. Distant planets caught the light of their parent stars and glowed softly. "When I first took my position as Empress 20 years ago, the Althean Collective was the most advanced civilization in this region of space. We had developed technologies that other species could not match. We were leaders. We were innovators. But over time that changed. Younger civilizations began to catch up. Some have even surpassed us in certain areas. We have become comfortable with what we have, and comfort has made us lazy. She turned to face Thomas. I want to change that. I want to bring back the spirit of innovation and discovery that once defined my people. I want to show them that progress is not something to fear but something to celebrate. And I believe you can help me do that. Eleanor led Thomas to another chamber. This one was different. It was empty except for a single large table and several comfortable chairs. A door on the far side led to what looked like a private office. This is where you will work, Eleanor said. This will be your headquarters. You will have access to any resource you request, any equipment, any personnel, anything you need to do your job. What job exactly? Thomas asked carefully. You have not actually told me what you want me to do. Eleanor smiled slightly. I am making you Chief Innovation Officer of the Althean Collective. You will oversee technological advancement across my entire empire. You will work directly beneath me. You will have authority to approve new research projects, to redirect resources, to implement new systems and procedures. You will essentially be in charge of making sure my people remember how to innovate again. Thomas felt his stomach drop. This was too much. This was impossible. He was a mechanic from a small repair shop on Kepler Station. He had no formal training in advanced science or engineering. He had no experience managing large organizations or dealing with bureaucracy. I cannot do this, Thomas said honestly. I am not qualified. I do not have the education or the experience. There must be someone from your own civilization who would be better suited for this position. There are many Altheans who are better educated than you, Eleanor acknowledged. There are many who have studied advanced physics and mathematics for decades. But there is something you have that they lack. You have the ability to see problems differently. You have the freedom from tradition that my own people do not have. You ask questions. You challenge assumptions. That is exactly what I need. She led him to a smaller office that would be his personal workspace. The walls displayed holographic images of various Althean technologies. Diagrams showed systems and structures that Thomas did not fully understand. There will be resistance, Eleanor warned him. The Council of Ministers views innovation as threatening. Stability is their priority. They believe that if we maintain the current system and do not make drastic changes, we will remain safe and prosperous. But I disagree. I believe that stagnation is the greatest threat we face. And they will not be happy about your appointment. Then why do it? Thomas asked. Why create conflict with your own council if you know they will oppose this change? Because necessary change always creates conflict, Eleanor replied. Real progress requires someone to be willing to challenge the old ways. I have the authority as Empress to make this appointment, and I am using that authority. The council will complain. They will make things difficult for you. But that is the cost of innovation. Over the following weeks, Thomas settled into his new role. Eleanor provided him with tutoring on Althean technology and culture. She introduced him to the engineering teams he would be working with. She gave him access to the records of failed projects and abandoned research initiatives. Thomas studied the records carefully. He found that most of the failed projects had been rejected not because they were flawed but because they violated established protocols or challenged traditional thinking. Researchers had proposed brilliant ideas, but those ideas had been shut down by a conservative council that feared change. Thomas began his first major project by reviewing all the pending research proposals that had been rejected in the past 5 years. There were dozens of them. He selected 17 proposals that showed real promise but had been rejected for bureaucratic reasons rather than scientific ones. He approved funding for all of them. The reaction was immediate and mixed. Some engineers and scientists celebrated. They had been waiting years to pursue their research, and finally someone in authority was willing to let them try. But others were deeply concerned. The Council of Ministers sent formal letters of protest to Eleanor's office. Thomas received his first official complaint from Minister Garrett, the eldest and most influential member of the council. Garrett was a rigid traditionalist who had served the empire for over 3 centuries. He believed that the old ways were the best ways. You are introducing chaos into a system that has maintained stability for generations, Garrett said during an official hearing before the council. This human has no understanding of our culture, our values, or our scientific principles. He is approving dangerous experiments that could damage our infrastructure or worse. I recommend his immediate removal from office. But Eleanor stood firm. The dangerous thing is not to try new ideas, she said calmly. The dangerous thing is to never try anything at all. Thomas stays. And we will see what his innovations can bring to our civilization. Thomas continued his work. 9 months into Thomas's tenure as Chief Innovation Officer, everything changed. He was working late in his office, reviewing proposals for new energy systems, when the communication system went dark. All the lights in the station flickered. An emergency alarm began to sound throughout the facility. Thomas stood up quickly, confused and alarmed. He moved toward the door, but before he could reach it, armed security forces burst into his office. They wore the uniforms of the Althean military, but something felt wrong. These were not the normal guards who protected the station. Thomas Wright, you are under arrest, the lead officer said coldly. By order of the Council of Ministers, you are charged with espionage, sabotage and endangering the security of the Althean collective. You will come with us immediately. What? Thomas protested. This is a mistake. There must be some confusion. I have done nothing wrong. You will have the opportunity to defend yourself, the officer said, grabbing Thomas's arm. Now come. They dragged Thomas from his office and through the corridors of Meridian Station. He saw other security forces moving through the halls, escorting other officials from their offices. Something terrible was happening. Thomas was taken to a detention cell deep within the station. The walls were made of a material that blocked all communication signals. A force field across the front of the cell prevented him from leaving. Hours passed. Thomas had no way to know what was happening outside his cell. Then, finally, a holographic display activated on the wall. Minister Garrett appeared on the screen, his ancient face filled with satisfaction. Thomas Wright, Garrett said. You have been found guilty of conspiring with foreign powers to undermine the security of the Althean collective. You have deliberately introduced flawed technology into our systems. You have encouraged dangerous experimentation that has destabilized our infrastructure. Most importantly, you have convinced our Empress to abandon the principles that have kept our civilization safe for thousands of years. Thomas felt his heart racing. Where is Eleanor? What have you done with her? The Empress has been removed from power, Garrett replied. She has been imprisoned in the palace vault, a place from which no one has ever escaped. The Council of Ministers now governs the Althean collective. We will restore order and stability. Your influence has ended, human. Soon, all your so-called innovations will be undone. The holographic display went dark. Thomas was devastated. Eleanor had trusted him, had given him authority and resources, and now she was imprisoned because of his work. He sat in the detention cell, feeling despair wash over him. But then, slowly, his despair transformed into determination. He had not survived 10 years as a struggling mechanic by giving up easily. He had not solved an impossible alien ship by accepting defeat. Thomas began to examine his cell carefully. The force field that blocked his exit was sophisticated, but it was technology. All technology had principles. All systems had flaws. Thomas studied the way the force field flickered slightly as it cycled through its power sequence. He watched the pattern repeat over and over. He removed the metal fastener from his prison uniform and began to work on a small circuit panel hidden in the wall behind his bunk. The work was delicate and dangerous, but Thomas had steady hands. He had spent his entire life working with technology. Slowly, carefully, he began to disable the security protocols that controlled his cell. After 6 hours of work, the force field flickered and died. Thomas pushed against the cell door and it slid open. He moved carefully through the detention block. Most of the guards had been called away to maintain order throughout the station. Thomas encountered only 2 guards, and he managed to slip past them by hiding in storage compartments. He made his way through the station's maintenance tunnels, passages that ran beneath the main corridors. These tunnels connected all the major systems of the station. Few people knew about them, but Thomas had studied the station's blueprints during his time working there. He used them to reach the central computer core. Once there, Thomas began a systematic hack of the station's communication systems. It was dangerous work. Security systems were designed to prevent exactly this kind of intrusion. But Thomas had learned a great deal about Althean technology in the past 9 months. He understood how their systems worked. He created false credentials, routed his signals through backup systems, and slowly worked his way deeper into the network. Within hours, he had access to the internal communication systems. He immediately broadcast a message throughout the entire Althean collective, not just to Meridian Station but to every planet, every colony, every outpost. He explained what had happened. He told them about the coup. He explained that the Council of Ministers had imprisoned the Empress and blamed Thomas for crimes he did not commit. But more importantly, Thomas spoke directly to the workers and engineers who had benefited from his innovations. He reminded them of the improvements they had seen. He reminded them that their lives had gotten better because of change and progress. He asked them to support Eleanor and to resist the council's return to stagnation. The response was overwhelming. Workers throughout the collective began to protest. Engineers refused to follow orders from the council. Entire stations declared their loyalty to Eleanor. The council's attempt to maintain control through force began to crumble. Thomas then accessed the vault where Eleanor was imprisoned. The security protocols were incredibly complex, more advanced than anything protecting a regular cell. It took Thomas 8 hours of continuous work to crack the system. His hands shook with exhaustion as he entered the final override code. The vault door slid open. Eleanor emerged, unharmed but furious. "Thomas," she said, embracing him quickly. "You escaped. You freed me. But the council still controls the command center. They have military forces loyal to them." "Not for long," Thomas said. He led Eleanor to a communication station. Together they broadcast one final message throughout the station. Eleanor spoke as the Empress, calling on all loyal forces to gather at the command center. She spoke with an authority that could not be denied. When they arrived at the command center, they found that Thomas's message had already changed everything. The station's security forces, most of whom were ordinary workers and engineers rather than career soldiers, had turned against the council's appointed commanders. The military officers loyal to Minister Garrett found themselves outnumbered and outgunned. Garrett himself stood in the center of the command chamber, surrounded by his remaining supporters. When he saw Eleanor and Thomas enter, his face turned pale. "You cannot win," Garrett said desperately. "The entire council will stand against you. We will never accept the rule of an empress who has been corrupted by foreign influence." "Then you will stand against the will of my people," Eleanor replied calmly. "And that, Minister Garrett, is treason." The remaining members of Garrett's faction surrendered immediately. There was no need for violence. The aftermath of the uprising unfolded over the following 3 weeks. Eleanor established a temporary government council composed of ministers who supported reform and progress. Investigations began immediately into the conspiracy that had led to the coup. Evidence was gathered, testimonies were collected, and slowly the full scope of the conspiracy was revealed. Minister Garrett and his inner circle had been planning the coup for over a year. They had carefully built support among conservative factions within the government. They had spread propaganda claiming that Thomas's innovations were dangerous and that Eleanor was being manipulated by foreign powers. They had prepared detailed plans to reverse all of Thomas's reforms and return the Althean collective to its former rigid structure. The investigation also revealed something more troubling. Garrett and his supporters had been secretly working to undermine the collective's economy. They had hidden resources and diverted funding from essential services. They had done this intentionally, hoping to create chaos that would justify their coup and make people desperate enough to accept their authoritarian rule. When all the evidence was compiled, Eleanor made a difficult decision. She called for a public trial. Every citizen of the Althean collective would have the right to witness the proceedings through live broadcast. Transparency, she declared, was essential to rebuilding trust in government. The trial lasted 2 weeks. Thomas was called to testify about his work and his removal from office. He explained calmly and clearly how his innovations had improved efficiency and productivity throughout the empire. He described the projects he had approved and their successful outcomes. He admitted that not every project had succeeded perfectly, but he emphasized that failure was a necessary part of progress and learning. Minister Garrett was given the opportunity to defend himself. He argued that rapid change was dangerous and that stability should always be the priority. But his arguments began to sound hollow when the evidence of his conspiracy was presented. When it became clear that he had deliberately sabotaged the economy to create justification for his coup, public opinion turned decisively against him. The verdict came swiftly. Garrett and his closest supporters were found guilty of conspiracy, treason, and crimes against the state. However, Eleanor showed mercy. Instead of executing them, she sentenced them to exile. They would be transported to a remote colony far from the centers of Althean civilization. There, they could live out their lives in isolation, knowing that their time of power had ended forever. Not all members of the old council were punished. Many had simply followed orders without understanding the full scope of the conspiracy. Eleanor offered them a choice. They could resign from the council and retire with dignity, or they could accept reduced roles in a new government structure. Most chose to resign. In the weeks following the trial, Eleanor began implementing sweeping governmental reforms. She established a new council structure that included representatives from different regions and professions, not just elite ministers. She created systems that allowed engineers and scientists to propose new research without requiring approval from government officials. She established oversight committees composed of ordinary citizens who could review major decisions and provide feedback. But most importantly, Eleanor appointed Thomas as permanent advisor to the throne. This was an unprecedented position. Thomas would have direct access to Eleanor and would work alongside her on all major decisions affecting the collective's future. This appointment was met with celebration by the people but with some resistance from conservative elements who still existed within the government. Thomas was invited to address the Grand Assembly of the Althean Collective. This was the largest gathering of representatives from across the empire. Thousands of delegates attended in person, while trillions more watched through holographic broadcasts throughout the collective's territory. Thomas stood before this enormous audience, feeling nervous but determined. Eleanor sat beside him, her expression showing confidence and support. "I am Thomas Wright," he began, his voice steady and clear. "I am from a small planet called Earth. I am from a species that has not yet achieved interstellar travel on our own. 9 months ago I was a mechanic in a small repair shop. I was struggling financially and professionally. I had no ambitions to change an empire or to influence the course of an entire civilization." He paused, looking out at the assembled faces. "But I was given an opportunity. An empress saw something in me worth developing. She gave me the chance to contribute my ideas to your collective. And I have learned something important during my time here. Innovation is not something to fear. Progress is not something to avoid. Change is the only constant in the universe. And the civilizations that survive and thrive are those willing to embrace change, to learn from it, and to grow because of it." Thomas gestured toward the holographic display showing data from the past 9 months. "In this short period, we have increased station efficiency by more than 20%. We have improved communication systems that now connect distant colonies faster and more reliably than ever before. We have developed new energy production methods that have reduced waste and increased output. We have accomplished these things not because I am brilliant or because I am special. We have accomplished them because your engineers and scientists were waiting for permission to innovate. They were waiting for someone to believe in them." He looked directly at Eleanor. "The Empress believed in them. And together we have shown that progress is possible. But this is only the beginning. The real innovation will come from your own people, from the next generation of Althean scientists and engineers who will grow up in a culture that celebrates discovery instead of fearing it." Eleanor stood and placed her hand on Thomas's shoulder, making the gesture formal and official in front of the entire assembly. "I appoint Thomas Wright as permanent advisor to the throne," she declared, her voice carrying across every communication channel in the collective. "His voice will guide our empire toward a new era. An era where ideas flow freely. Where all beings, regardless of species or background, can contribute their talents to our collective future.